The first alert came through my phone at 8:17 on a Thursday night. I was 2 hours away. I was sitting in my apartment after a long workday, eating cold takeout straight from the container, when my security app flashed a motion notification from the Lakehouse. At first, I thought it was a raccoon. Then I opened the live camera. The lights were on in my living room. 6 people were sitting around my dining table. There were coffee cups on my counter, folders spread across the table, a plate of pastries near the sink, and a woman in a navy blazer standing in front of my fireplace like she owned the place. She was pointing at a budget sheet and talking about landscaping contracts, dock rules, and late dues. Her name was Vivian Crowley, president of the Willow Bay Estates HOA, and she was holding a board meeting inside my private lake house. For a few seconds, I could not move. I just stared at the screen, while strangers leaned back in my chairs, used my mugs, set papers on the table my father had refinished by hand, and discussed HOA business under the family photos hanging on my wall. Then Vivian said something that made my stomach turn cold. She said, "This place is perfect for executive sessions. And since he is never here, he will never know." He meant me. I called the sheriff before I even grabbed my keys. By the time I got there, a deputy was already standing on my porch. And Vivian was outside explaining very calmly that the HOA had legacy amenity access to the property. She handed him a key log from the management company showing the Lakehouse as an association overflow meeting cottage. There was just one problem. My Lakehouse had never belonged to the HOA. It was not a common area. It was not a clubhouse. It was not an amenity cottage. It was a separate parcel my father bought decades earlier, with its own deed, its own tax record, its own dock, and its own history. The only connection to Willow Bay was a small maintenance easement near the driveway for a drainage culvert. That easement allowed access to a ditch outside the house. It did not allow anyone to unlock my front door. Vivian kept saying they had a key, as if a piece of metal could replace permission. But the camera had recorded everything. Months of board meetings, committee sessions, a wine and cheese gathering, people opening my cabinets, someone taking pictures of documents on my desk, someone using my bathroom, my electricity, my Wi-Fi, my coffee, and my father's lake house like it was a free clubhouse with better furniture. And when the sheriff finally reviewed the key log Vivian was waving around, found the first crack. The log was fake. Not fake because the paper did not exist. Fake because it had been created to make unauthorized access look official. No deed reference. No lease. No license agreement. No owner's signature. No board approval from the time my father owned the property. Just a legacy key pulled from an old box and turned into authority by a woman who thought confidence was the same thing as law. By the time this was over, the HOA paid for damages, utilities, legal fees, privacy violations, and unauthorized use. The management company lost its contract. Vivian was removed from the board. The sheriff's report became part of a criminal review, and Willow Bay had to send a letter admitting my lake house had never been HOA property. So before you believe anyone who says, "We have a key, so we have access," remember this: a key is not consent. A key log is not a deed, and an HOA meeting held inside someone else's home is not community business. It is trespass with refreshments. My father bought the lake house before Willow Bay Estates had gates, bylaws, newsletters, or people like Vivian Crowley pretending history belonged to whoever talked loudest in a meeting. Back then, the lake road was gravel. The lots were scattered. There was no fancy clubhouse, no marina committee, no architectural review board, and no glossy sign at the entrance, promising exclusive lakeside living. There was just water, pine trees, old cabins, fishing boats, and quiet mornings that smelled like damp wood and coffee. The lake house was not large. It had 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a screened porch, a narrow dock, and a kitchen with cabinets that never closed exactly right. My father loved it anyway. He worked as an electrician for 36 years, and he bought that place not because it was perfect, but because he could make it better with his own hands. He rewired the living room. He rebuilt the dock. He refinished the dining table. He patched the roof. He built the bookshelf beside the fireplace, the one Vivian later stood in front of while talking about HOA dues, like she was conducting business in a conference room. When I was a kid, that lake house was where summers began. My father taught me to fish off the dock, taught me how to start the old outboard motor, taught me how to coil rope so it did not tangle, and taught me that a house did not have to be expensive to be sacred. After he passed, I could not bring myself to sell it. I lived in the city for work. I did not get to the Lakehouse every weekend anymore. Sometimes months passed between visits. But I kept paying the taxes. I kept the insurance current. I hired someone to check the pipes in winter. I replaced the old smoke detectors. I installed cameras after a storm, damaged a back window, and I wanted to keep an eye on the place. I was not absent because I did not care. I was absent because life was busy, and grief has a way of making familiar places hurt before they comfort you again. Willow Bay Estates grew around the Lakehouse over time. The subdivision sat to the east and south, with newer homes, a clubhouse, a small marina, and walking paths that curved near the old lots. My property remained separate. My father had never joined the HOA. He had never signed covenants. He had never transferred the Lakehouse into common area. The county parcel map showed it clearly. One private parcel beside the Willow Bay boundary. Not inside it. There was one easement, and it was narrow. Years earlier, Willow Bay-S developer needed access near the edge of my father's driveway to maintain a drainage culvert and stormwater ditch. My father agreed, after making sure the easement stayed outside the house and did not grant any right to use the dock, yard, porch, driveway beyond the maintenance strip, or interior of the home. He kept the paperwork in a folder labeled Lakehouse Deed and Easement. My father was careful like that. He believed paperwork was only boring until someone tried to take something. For years, nobody did. Then Vivian Crowley became HOA president. Vivian had a talent for making overreach sound like administration. She used phrases like legacy access, community continuity, shared history, and implied amenity rights. She had moved into Willow Bay after the subdivision was already established, but somehow she spoke as if she had personally surveyed every acre and negotiated every deed. The Willow Bay clubhouse roof was under repair that year. The board complained that meetings in the temporary office felt cramped. Someone suggested renting space at a cafe in town. Someone else suggested Zoom. Vivian wanted something better, something impressive, something with a lake view. And my father's Lakehouse sat right there, quiet, private, and empty most weekdays. At first, the HOA sent harmless-sounding letters. They asked if I would consider renting the Lakehouse for community events. I said no. They asked if Willow Bay contractors could use the driveway during culvert work. I said, only as allowed by the easement, and with notice they asked if I would join the neighbor partnership program. I ignored that one. Then the letters stopped. I thought they had moved on. What I did not know was that the management company had an old storage box from the original developer files. Inside that box was a key with a faded tag reading, Lake Cottage, Willow Bay Overflow. Nobody called me. Nobody checked the deed. Nobody reviewed the easement. Nobody asked why a key existed, who gave it, what lock it opened, or whether it still had any legal meaning. Vivian saw that key and decided it answered every question she did not want to ask. That was the beginning, not with a broken window, not with a forced door, with a key and a lie written in neat handwriting on a log sheet. The first time Vivian entered my lake house, the camera caught her at 6:04 in the evening. She walked up the porch steps with the property manager behind her. She did not knock. She did not look uncertain. She opened the front door with a key, stepped inside, and turned on the lights. The property manager followed, carrying a folder. Vivian walked through the living room like she was inspecting a rental property. She looked at the fireplace, the lake view, the dining table, the kitchen, and the framed photo of my father holding a fish bigger than his forearm. Then she said, clear as day on the camera audio, "This will work. Not are we sure, not did the owner approve this." She just said, "This will work." The next week they came back with 4 board members. They brought coffee, pastries, printed agendas, and a portable speaker. They moved my dining chairs. They placed hoe packets across the table. They used my kitchen counter as a refreshment station. One board member opened my cabinet looking for mugs. Another asked if they should leave a note for the owner. Vivian said, "No, this is legacy access. The owner is barely here." That phrase appeared again and again, legacy access. She used it the way other people use a password. After that, the Lakehouse became their secret meeting spot. Budget meeting on Tuesday, architectural review on Thursday, marina committee the following Monday, executive session 2 weeks later, a private gathering with wine and cheese after that. Every time they signed Vivian's key log, Every time they treated the place a little less carefully. They used my electricity and water. They adjusted the thermostat. They left crumbs on the counter. They moved my father's chair away from the fireplace. They placed laptops on the dining table without coasters. They used my bathroom and left the fan running. One evening, someone spilled red wine on the rug near the bookshelf and tried to scrub it with paper towels. My cameras recorded all of it. I did not notice at first because the Lakehouse cameras mostly sent alerts for storms, animals, or motion near windows. I had turned down notifications because a branch kept triggering the side camera. That was another thing Vivian counted on without knowing it. Old homes make noise and busy owners miss alerts. Then came the Thursday night notification. The board was in the middle of a dues discussion when I opened the app. Vivian stood by my fireplace. A man named Roger, one of the board members, sat in my father's chair. Another woman had opened my kitchen cabinet and was looking for plates. A folder labeled Willow Bay Executive Session sat on my table beside one of my father's old fishing journals. I called the sheriff. Then I got in my truck and drove. I remember that drive more clearly than I remember most things from that year. The headlights on the dark county road, my hands tight on the wheel, the way my anger kept turning into disbelief and then back into anger again. Who does this? Who unlocks a private house and holds a meeting inside? Who sits under family photos and calls it overflow space? When I arrived, Deputy Harris was already on the porch. Vivian was outside talking to him with that calm, polished voice people use when they are trying to control the first version of a story. She told him Willow Bay had legacy access. She showed him the key log. She said the Lakehouse had historically functioned as an association overflow cottage. I walked up behind them and said, "That is my house." Vivian turned toward me. Surprised but not ashamed, she said, "Mr. Lawson, this is an unfortunate misunderstanding." I said, "You are inside my home." She said, "We have documented access." I said, "You have a key." She lifted the log and said, "And access records." Deputy Harris asked if she had a deed, lease, license agreement, written permission, or HOA document showing legal authority to enter the residence. Vivian said, "The management company maintained the key as part of legacy developer files." The deputy repeated the question. "Do you have written permission from the owner?" She did not answer directly. That was the first time her confidence cracked. I asked everyone to leave. Most board members looked mortified. Roger would not meet my eyes. One woman whispered that she thought Vivian had cleared it. The property manager kept saying the key came from the old files. Vivian tried to gather the papers like the problem was housekeeping. I told her not to remove anything that had been brought into the house until the deputy photographed it. She objected. The deputy told her to wait. That was when the night shifted from embarrassing to serious. Because once Deputy Harris stepped inside, he saw what the camera had already seen. HOA agendas, meeting notes, coffee cups, food, personal items moved, my cabinet open, my documents disturbed, and people acting like my home had been assigned to them. I unlocked my camera history while standing in the living room. One clip, then another, Vivian opening the door. Vivian saying, "If he is never here, he will never know." A board member opening the desk drawer. Someone photographing a folder near the bookshelf. The wine spill, the thermostat change. The meeting where Vivian said, "Do not list the cottage address publicly. Keep it executive only." Deputy Harris watched quietly. Then he looked at Vivian and said the sentence she did not want to hear. "The key is not consent." I did not sleep that night. After the deputy cleared the house and everyone left, I stood alone in the living room, with all the lights on. The lake was black beyond the windows. My father's chair sat out of place near the wall. There was a coffee ring on the table. The rug still had a faint red stain. The trash can held napkins and paper cups from people who had no right to be there. It was not the mess that bothered me most. It was the comfort. They had been comfortable in my home. That made the violation worse. I walked room by room with my phone and recorded everything. Chairs moved, cabinet open, pantry items used, bathroom towel damp, thermostat set low, papers on the table, wine stain, scuff marks near the door, the lock, the key log Vivian had photographed before the deputy took a copy. The agendas left behind. Then I downloaded the camera footage, every clip, every entrance, every exit, every voice. I created folders by date and labeled them carefully. First entry, budget meeting, architectural review, wine spill, desk drawer opened, Vivian statement owner. Never here, executive location, hidden sheriff response night. The next morning, I called a locksmith. He changed every exterior lock and wrote a report stating there was no sign of forced entry, meaning access had been made using a working key that mattered, because this was not a burglary with broken glass. It was worse in a different way, a quiet, repeated violation made to look official. Then I opened my father's file. The deed was clear: private parcel, separate tax ID, no HOA covenants. No common area designation, no transfer to Willow Bay. The easement was even clearer. It allowed limited access along the driveway edge for drainage culvert maintenance. It did not enter the yard except for the marked strip. It did not touch the house. It did not mention meetings keys, amenities, overflow use, or interior access. I scanned everything. Then I hired an attorney named Claire Benton. Claire handled property rights and HOA disputes, and she had the calmness of someone who knew panic was a luxury her clients could not afford. I sent her the deed, easement, tax record, camera clips, locksmith report, sheriff incident number, photos, and Vivian S. key log. She called me back and said, "Do not speak to Vivian directly again." Then she sent preservation demands to Willow Bay HOA, to Vivian Crowley, to every board member who entered, to the property management company, to the HOA attorney, to the insurer. The letter demanded preservation of all key logs. Emails, texts, board minutes, meeting notices, access records, management files, old developer boxes, insurance policies, communications about the Lakehouse, and any document claiming authority to enter or use the property. The management company responded first. They claimed the key was a legacy developer key, and that the property had been labeled for overflow association use in their old storage records. Claire asked for the legal document behind that label. They sent the label, not a deed, not a lease, just a label. Claire called it exactly what it was: office folklore. The next discovery batch was worse for them. An email from Roger, the board member, to Vivian read, "Are we sure the Lakehouse is ours to use? I do not see it listed in common area records." Vivian replied, "The key exists. That is enough for operational access. If the owner does not use it, we should not create problems by asking." Another email said, "Do not put the cottage address on public notices. Keep it as executive location only." Another stated, "Management says it is in the legacy box. We can treat it as overflow unless challenged." Unless challenged. That phrase made me sit back from my laptop. They knew enough to hide it. They knew enough not to publish the address. They knew enough to avoid asking me. They knew enough to rely on my absence. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a decision. Claire prepared a demand letter asking for immediate admission that the Lakehouse was private property, a full accounting of every entry, return, and destruction of every key, reimbursement for cleaning, utilities, lock replacement, property damage, legal fees, and compensation for unauthorized use and privacy invasion. She also warned that the sheriff's report and footage could support civil claims for trespass, conversion of use, invasion of privacy, and possible criminal review depending on local law. Vivian's response came through the HOA attorney. They called it a historic access misunderstanding. Claire laughed once when she read that and said, "People love the word historic when they have no document." Then she filed the civil complaint, and the sheriff asked to review the full footage. That was when Vivian's key log stopped being a shield and became evidence. The key log looked official at first glance. That was why Vivian loved it. It had columns for date, time, user, purpose, and initials. It had the management company logo at the top. It called the property Lake Cottage, Association Overflow Meeting Property. It listed entries for board meetings, executive sessions, committee reviews, and amenity planning. But Claire noticed the problem immediately. The log began 3 months earlier. My father had owned the Lakehouse for decades. I had owned it after him. If this was truly legacy access, where were the old entries? Where was the original agreement? Where was the transfer? Where was the board resolution? Where was the insurance schedule listing the cottage? Where was the lease? Where was the owner authorization? Where was the document that turned my dining room into a boardroom? There was none. The management company eventually admitted the log had been created after Vivian found the key in a developer's storage box. Before that, there was no active access log, no confirmed ownership record, and no written permission. Then the county records destroyed the rest. The final Willow Bay plat did not include my parcel. The declaration did not list the Lakehouse as common area. Tax assessor listed me as owner. The deed chain never transferred the property to Willow Bay. The easement was limited to exterior drainage access. The Lakehouse was not covered by HOA insurance as an amenity. The HOA had never paid utilities, taxes, repairs, or maintenance for the house. They had no paper trail because they had no right. Deputy Harris reviewed the key log, county records, the locksmith report, and footage. He was careful with his words, but clear, saying, "Having a key does not mean having permission. If someone uses a key to enter a private residence without authority, it can still be unlawful entry." Vivian did not like that. Her attorney liked it less. The key log also created another problem. It showed board members had entered repeatedly, not once by mistake. Some entries were listed as executive sessions. Some were not in public meeting notices. Some minutes referred only to off-site executive location with no address. One meeting involved discussion of violations and owner disputes. Another involved contracts. That made Willow Bay residents angry for a different reason. Their board had been meeting secretly in a private house, using a location not properly noticed, discussing HOA business, and exposing the association to legal risk. The board members began separating themselves. Roger said Vivian told him access had been verified. Another member said, "The property manager produced the key." The property manager said Vivian directed them to create the log. Vivian said the key came from developer files, and everyone understood what that meant. Claire answered with one sentence, "A key found in a box is not a real estate instrument." Then came the worst clip. It was from the third meeting they held in my house. Vivian stood near my kitchen counter, while another board member asked whether they should notify me as a courtesy. Vivian said, "Absolutely not, once an owner starts asking questions. Everything gets complicated." That clip ended any chance of calling it innocent, because they had known the solution was to ask, and they chose not to. The Willow Bay clubhouse was packed the night everything came out. Residents had heard rumors for weeks. Some thought I was exaggerating. Some thought the HOA had accidentally used an old cottage once. Some believed Vivian's message that this was a historical access confusion being exploited by an outside owner. Then Claire played the first video. Vivian unlocking my front door. Board members walking in, lights on, coffee on the counter, my dining table covered with HOA folders. Then the next clip. If he is never here, he will never know. The room went silent. Claire did not need to raise her voice. She placed the records on the projector, one at a time: my deed, the county parcel map, the final Willow Bay plat, the declaration, the drainage easement, the locksmith report, the Sheriff S. incident report, the key log creation date, Vivian S. email, the key exists. That is enough. The hidden meeting email, do not put the cottage address on public notices. Then the clip, once an owner starts asking questions, everything gets complicated. People started turning toward Vivian before Claire even finished. The resident asked, "Did we hold meetings in his house without permission?" Vivian said counsel had advised her not to discuss ongoing litigation. Another resident asked, "Were my violation hearings discussed there?" There was no answer. Another asked, "Do we have keys to other private homes?" That question broke the room open. The management company representative stood and said they were auditing all legacy keys immediately. It did not calm anyone. It made things worse. Residents began demanding to know why any unidentified keys existed at all, who had access, and whether other old developer labels had been treated as permission. Deputy Harris attended to clarify the sheriff's report. He did not dramatize it. He simply stated that the Lakehouse owner had provided documentation of ownership, that the HOA had not produced written authority to enter, and that the use of a key did not by itself establish consent. Then he said the line everyone remembered: a key is access. Consent is permission. They are not the same thing. Vivian S. face went pale. The board called an emergency executive discussion, but residents objected immediately. They did not trust the board to discuss transparency in secret after discovering secret meetings inside my home. By the end of the night, Vivian was forced to recuse herself from all matters involving the Lakehouse. The board voted to suspend the management company's access to all legacy keys. Independent counsel was hired, the insurer was notified. All board meetings held in my Lakehouse were placed under review. The HOA agreed to provide Claire with a full list of dates, attendees, topics, and any documents brought into my property. The insurance carrier later issued a reservation of rights letter. That meant they might not cover intentional unauthorized entry or acts outside board authority. When residents learned that, the anger sharpened. This was no longer just embarrassment. It was money, cleaning costs, legal fees, settlement exposure, possible privacy claims, possible challenge to board actions, potential criminal review, all because Vivian wanted a prettier meeting room than the temporary office. The management company was fired within a month. They tried to argue Vivian directed the use. Vivian argued they provided the key. Board members argued they relied on both of them. That circular blame did not impress anyone. The facts were too simple. They entered a house they did not own. They had no written permission. They hid the location. They used the key repeatedly. They got caught on camera. Everything else was noise. The settlement letter arrived on a rainy afternoon. I was sitting at the same dining table they had used for board meetings, but this time the house was quiet. HOA folders, no coffee cups that did not belong to me, no strangers under my father's photographs, just rain on the lake and the smell of old wood. Willow Bay admitted in writing that the Lakehouse was private property. Not HOA common area, not an amenity, not an overflow meeting cottage, and not subject to HOA access rights beyond the limited exterior drainage easement. They agreed never to enter without my written permission. They reimbursed the locksmith bill, cleaning costs, utility usage, damaged rug, damaged cabinet hardware, attorney fees, and a settlement amount for unauthorized use and privacy invasion. They had to provide a full access history and identify every person who entered. Every key had to be surrendered or destroyed under written certification. The fake key log was preserved as evidence but removed from management records. The old legacy key box was audited. Vivian resigned before the removal vote, but nobody mistook that for dignity. Her emails followed her out. The key exists. That is enough if the owner does not use it. We should not create problems by asking, do not put the cottage address on public notices. If he is never here, he will never know. Those words became her legacy, not the landscaping budgets, not the marina rules, not the image of strong HOA leadership she tried so hard to project. Just the arrogance of thinking a private home became available because the owner was away. The management company lost the Willow Bay contract and later sent residents a formal notice explaining new key control policies. No unlabeled legacy keys, no access without deed verification, no board use of private property without written agreement, no executive sessions in unapproved locations. The HOA also had to send a correction letter to residents. It said my lake house had never been part of Willow Bay Estates. I kept that letter in my father's folder, not because I needed to read it again, because I wanted the lie buried under paper. After the settlement, I made changes: new locks, new cameras, a security system tied directly to my phone. A sign near the porch read, "Private Lake House, not HOA property, no entry without written permission." I changed the WIA password, replaced the rug, cleaned the cabinets, and moved my father's chair back beside the fireplace. That last part mattered more than I expected. For months, I had felt like the house had been turned into something else. A meeting room, an asset, a convenience, a place strangers discussed dues while surrounded by my family's memories. Putting the chair back made the house feel like itself again. One evening, after everything ended, I sat on the porch with the door open behind me. The lake was calm. The dock creaked in the breeze. The dining table was clear. My father's fishing journal was back on the shelf where it belonged. I thought about how simple the whole thing should have been. Ask permission. That was all. If Vivian had called me and asked to rent the lake house, I would have said no, but at least she would have treated me like the owner. Instead, she found a key, invented a history, created a log, hid the address, and counted on my absence. That is what people like Vivian do. They do not always break down doors. Sometimes they open them quietly with a key they should not have, then act offended when you ask why they are standing in your living room. The lesson is simple. A key is not consent. A label is not a deed. A legacy file is not a license. An easement outside a driveway does not open a front door. And an HOA cannot turn a private home into community property by using it enough times to make the trespass feel routine. If you own a cabin, lake house, rental, inherited property, or second home near an HOA, check your records, know your parcel, read your easements, install cameras, keep your deed close. Ask who has keys. Change locks when ownership changes. And never assume that because a house is quiet, people will respect it. Quiet homes are sometimes exactly what overreaching people target. Vivian thought my lake house was empty. She was wrong. It was full of records, cameras, memories, and a father who had taught me to keep every document that mattered. She held board meetings under his roof because she thought I would never know. But the camera saw her. The deed contradicted her. The sheriff documented her. And in the end, the house she tried to turn into an HOA meeting room became the reason she lost her seat. If this story made you think about your own property, share it with someone who owns a cabin or second home near an HOA. Comment what you would have done if you opened your camera and saw strangers holding a meeting in your living room. And subscribe for more stories where homeowners win not by doing something reckless, but by keeping proof, knowing their rights, and remembering one truth that every HOA board should already know. Permission matters, and without it, even a key opens the wrong door.